Greetings, everyone, to Macro Social Work Stories. Today, we have a guest whose interest is in focusing on teaching, race, racism, anti-racism, feminism, and social work research. We'd like to welcome to our podcast on today, Natasha Bragg, also a doctoral candidate. And so we're going to talk about her experience, talk about her journey as we look at her opportunity to partner, to connect, and also challenge systems and structures that are not always fair and equitable to gender. Also, so we're going to take some time as we begin our time together. Can you share with us one thing, a fun fact about yourself as we begin our talk on today?
Well, thanks, Gary. Dr. Jones, I'm not sure which you prefer. A fun fact about myself, let's see. I studied Russian classical ballet for 14 years.
Okay.
And then I quit to go to college.
Okay.
So that's a fun fact.
Yeah, it's Russian classical ballet.
Yes,
Okay.
Russian classical ballet.
Yeah,
they're very specific. So.
Okay. Yeah. So the arts and the scientists connecting in that process.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we know that you now are working on your beginning the doctoral process in the different stages of it. What led you to go to that, take that path?
Sure. So I think I don't want to say always known, but since college, I believe that I anticipated one day going for the PhD and doing that. I love being in school. I had such an amazing experience in my undergraduate education that I just, I wanted to do that for always. I wanted to be in the classroom for always. And I knew I couldn't do that as a student, but you can do that as a professor. So I love teaching and I love being taught and, critical education, critical, pedagogical approaches, it's a dynamic process. So teachers are learning and students are teaching and vice versa and whatnot. So that's what led me to this path is that I have family who have a history of being in academia. So I've had some family members who are professors, psychology, divinity, ethics, dance even. So it was easy for me. I had that privilege of being kind of acculturated into that environment early on. But a little bit about my story, I guess, would be that I graduated from Manchester, which is now university, but it was then a Manchester college, small liberal arts college in northeastern Indiana, with a degree in psychology and sociology. And I had never taken a social work class in college. And when I'm looking at graduate schools, I'm thinking about PhD programs in sociology, and I run across an advertisement for the Brown School at Washington University in St. Louis. Their social, obviously their MSW program, with a focus in social and economic development. And have always been very drawn to social justice issues. Why this is part of the reason why sociology always appealed to me. And I figured, hey, I have the qualifications. I'm going to apply for this. It's the only graduate program I applied to because I just kind of knew I had to be there. So yeah, I graduated and I went to WashU and I got that MSW, macro focused. And after that, moved back to Indiana because I met someone and he was very much rooted in the state. So moved back to Indiana, originally from Chicago. But I started practicing and kind of got a job in, whatever was hiring. So it really steered me away from macro work per se, although, we can get into the discussion of macro and micro work and how it's all together. We can't, exactly. Yeah. So, and in 2016, I started part-time, not part-time. I started 2016, the PhD program at Indiana University School of Social Work. And yep, I'm about a year away. So I have my IRB approval, so I'm going to start data collection soon.
Yes, yes, the
Yeah,
journey,
yeah,
the journey.
yes.
Yes, yes. And as you talk about your interest in entering the field of social work, you talked about economic issues,
Hmm.
and so you're in the right spot. You're in the right spot.
That's right.
We have
Yes, yes, yes.
we believe that social workers, we believe that
Hmm.
various members of our society should challenge the different structures. And so,
Right.
as we look at the economy and historical issues, what are some things that you were faced with as you worked on, let's say, the groundwork, as we look to economic issues? We're trying to bring about change in communities with individuals.
Sure. So a large part of my practice experience was working at the county hospital in Indianapolis. I was part of a team called the Grace Team. We were pairs of nurse practitioners and social workers, and we worked with the geriatric population. And these are older adults that are often experiencing poverty, um, homelessness, food insecurity, transportation issues, et cetera, all of these barriers to accessing consistent healthcare. So they're not getting in to see their primary doctor regularly. Um, and so really my job in that dimension of practice was not clinical. Yes, we did mental health things, but my involvement in my client's life at that point, which were patients of doctors within the county hospital, Eskenazi. It is Eskenazi Hospital. It was really assessing what needs are and accessing resources, referrals, etc., which are never you know what is out there is never what's needed. But again, this is what we would call maybe an upriver approach to solving situations, which is, putting band-aids on problems. I think as social workers, at least in my experience, it's very difficult to have opportunities to work at the actual issues that are leading to poverty and food insecurity, et cetera, et cetera. So we are helping relieve the symptoms of that, but it is still difficult to work for change so that we don't have an older adult population in Indianapolis who can't make rent, can't buy food, can't use public transportation or get from point A to point B without extreme difficulty. They don't face barriers to healthcare, that can't pay their heating bill, in sub-zero weather, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one of the difficulties I face. But, definitely a big part of my job was accessing those community resources, making referrals, being very much a gatekeeper, which, implies power dynamics big time. And yeah, maintaining trust and rapport and with not only the clients, the patients, but also, with our community members and other professionals in the city who are gatekeepers for resources, right, for those clients. So, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a understanding of systems, because many times as social workers or helping professionals, we have a system
Mm-hmm.
look at the symptoms approach rather than
Yes.
looking at the rooted issues that could
Right.
bring about sustainable change, generational change,
Yeah.
transformation
Yeah.
in that process. One of my colleagues, can you talk about your questions as it relates to economics or transformation?
Well, so what you started to get to, Gary, is interesting on the systems issues. Natasha, it's wonderful you're taking on a course like you are, the pedagogy related to teaching about race and racism, which are, as Gary is suggesting, have historical dimensions to them. A, what led you to develop the course? And B, what kind of response have you gotten from your students? And then we'll get to C, which is what have you learned that you'd like to share with us as well?
Well, I have not actually developed a course yet. I am teaching a course that I did not develop this upcoming semester. I adjunct at Indiana University School of Social Work, and now also at Manchester University in the social work departments. So I'm unfortunately not faculty yet, so that I'm able to do those things. But I am teaching racial, ethnic, and gender disparities course this upcoming fall. And I guess part of how I've contributed to the design of my section is that we're using Beverly Daniel Tatum's. Well, I decided we're using this as a supplemental text, but it's required. I think this is imperative reading. I would say she is very efficient, and she writes at that like that 8th grade level, right? How we're supposed to write our journal articles at a easy to read level. So it's very easy to digest and to process. And she uses amazing references. Dr. Tatum is a clinical psychologist or research clinical psychologist. So she's fantastic. So we're going to be using that text. And I think it's fantastic that she does touch base on issues of intersectionality. And I feel like in my experience, social work educators can struggle with, how do I integrate? How do I even talk? How do I even approach racism? And we know that many of our professors, have white skin, right? We're white. A lot of us are white. And how do we talk about that in the classroom without, with comfort and with honesty? Because we have to model for our students what it looks like to have a conversation about race and about power and privilege, and even talk about what racism is, because we tag morals onto it when we need to start reconceptualizing, specifically in social work, what it means to be a racist and what racism actually is. And anyway,
no, that's good.
I digress, but this book, Dr. Tatum talks a lot about that, at least from her disciplinary perspective. But we need texts like that, because I find that even in our textbooks on diversity, we're not always talking about things in an approachable way. And there are so many different concepts, right, that are interrelated. And you can't talk about one without talking about the other. And it's difficult. It's difficult to teach that. Very complicated, dynamic concepts that are also very much loaded with a lot of, white guilt, and white shame and discomfort. Robin DiAngelo talks about white fragility, which, is a popular term these days. But I am excited, Steve, about teaching courses like this and designing my own courses in the future. Hopefully with a co-educator who is Black or Latino or Latina. So there's been some research on how when you do that dynamic teaching style, when you have a co-educator, one who has racial privilege and one who doesn't have racial privilege, you can model through your interactions between educators what that looks like to talk about very uncomfortable, at least for white people, uncomfortable conversations, and to be honest and to start opening those doors. So anyway, I have a lot of ideas.
Well, as somebody who's done this work as a white educator for a whole bunch of time, modeling and being open about being white in front of a mixed group is a real important thing, because it's the most obvious thing, and yet it's pretty amazing. White people don't do it very much. So
absolutely,
it's part of that work that built into that leads to, if people don't pay attention to it, the very issues that are in the book that you're talking about. So because of the isolation and the marginalization. Great stuff.
Yeah,
Christy, what are you thinking about? Christy, what are you thinking about?
Oh, I'm just thinking it's a hard topic to even broach in a group. I've done it. I did it in the South for several years, and I didn't enjoy it. It was not enjoyable. I like teaching gender and sexuality a lot better, even in the South, because it you get coming and going. And honestly, anybody who's standing in front of the classroom gets it coming and going, because everyone is so uncomfortable. I heard the word comfort, and it made me cringe a little inside, because it's not a word I associate with having this conversation in the classroom. So there are very few people who are able to feel comfortable having a conversation like this. I hope this improves. So all ideas are welcome.
What I do with that, it'd be great for you to talk about this, Natasha, Gary, obviously you too, is that people have to get comfortable with discomfort.
Yes.
I remember, Christy, what you said years ago. I thought there was some magic place I could get to if I finally, figure something out? Well, you never figure it out because there's always a new group of people who have to figure you out. And so we start over each and every time.
Yes. Absolutely.
And we're constantly leaving someone out. That's what I found. No matter how.
I'm sorry?
Like the curriculum or the professor teaching or trying to facilitate a group, we're always leaving someone out. And
Yes.
often leaving out those who we don't identify with as closely or don't know enough about or haven't read enough about. And so they're left out also because you're not wanting to make mistakes and speaking about a
Right.
group that you are not as educated on or don't have.
Absolutely.
And so there's a lot of points to hit when we're in this topic, and it's so impactful on everyone's daily lives. And I think that's why it makes it tougher, because we're not talking about airy-fairy ideas or philosophy rooted somewhere else or centuries ago.
Right.
We're here. And
Right.
it's more sensitive than ever. So.
Yes, totally. And I find I would agree with that, Christy. I addressed that in the beginning of class and in subsequent classes that, we're going to be talking about these things. I'm going to be very honest about it. I'm going to speak honestly and openly. I'm going to sometimes leave people out. That is not intentional. And I hope that you call me out on it when it happens, so I can acknowledge that publicly. And, my self-awareness can also be your self-awareness, and I'm going to make mistakes. And I do not claim to know everything about this, but I do think that having this conversation starting somewhere, is vital. That we not only do this today, but we continue to do this. And that leads to another point. So race and racism education across courses, right? We don't have a diversity class. And then that's where we talk about racism, right? Is in the diversity class. No, this needs to be integrated throughout the curriculum. And we need to be talking about racism when we're talking about solution-focused brief therapy and CBT and, client micro-practice interactions, right? Because there is a high degree of paternalism and power imbalances when, students say, well, I don't understand how anti-racism relates to clinical one-on-one class practice. That's not something that we will focus on. Absolutely it is, because it's your job as a social worker, right, to advocate for your client. And it is your job to have cultural humility. And you must be able to understand, or at least have some idea as to what this person might be experiencing based on their social identities, some of which are dominant, some of which are subordinate, right? But also your own. You have to have awareness of your own identity and how that will affect your client and how that will affect the power dynamics between you and your client. And when I say client, we can talk about individuals, but we're also talking about groups and communities. Absolutely. So I think we also have to press our students, our social work students, to have challenge, for them to question who they are, especially our white students. What is your identity? Where do you come from? What is your association with these topics? How are you involved in maintaining racist systems and institutions? What are times when you haven't spoken up when you should have? What does it mean to be white to you? And that's when I think we need to go beyond anti-racist education, anti-racist practice, and really delve into critical whiteness studies. In order to dissolve racism, we have to look at the group that's holding the power, and who are they? Where do they come from? Why is this happening? When you zero in on something and shine a light on it, that will hopefully eventually disappear. But, things grow in the shadows. So if we're not talking about what whiteness is, we can't begin to understand how we're going to disassemble white power. There's lots going on.
It's good stuff.
Yeah. So
it's good stuff. I mean, one of the things that a mistake that was made in this work was to focus way too much on everything related to Of course, it's a contradiction, right? But to focus on uh, Black suffering
Yes.
and not their incredible success and all the ways in which they've been able to succeed, and then have created the Oppression Olympics as a response, leaving out how white people continue to do the damage that we do. I love the line that you just said about things still grow in the shadows, and I think that's really accurate about this. That things get pigeonholed into particular courses, or they get a
Hmm.
particular focus that frees the person, the teacher, the white student, from having to confront themselves in relationship to this work.
Right. And also the term diversity, I'm not crazy about it because I feel like it implies the person making the decisions to pull in people different from them, the default is whiteness. So I feel like this term diversity, why we should get away from
Oh,
using it
interesting.
in social work is because it already implies, at least in my understanding and analysis, right, that default person who is in power already needs to make an effort to make the table more diverse, right? So I'm going to take you because you're Black. I'm going to take you because you're a Muslim. I'm going to take you because you're gay. And now my table's more diverse, right? So we need to find a concept that implies that it's not the white person, the cis person, the male person, cis male person, I should say, with the power to begin with.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
So
thinking
sorry. Go ahead.
it's just on a more macro level. I was thinking similarly, and does the teaching staff, does the nonprofit staff reflect their community? So
Right.
who are we recruiting in the neighborhood?
Absolutely.
So a lot of times the diversity quotas are focused on any type of diversity, even if it doesn't reflect who we're working with. And
Yeah.
that can be an issue too, even if it's well-intentioned or trying to meet a quota. And I would say the last university I was at did make an effort to have diversity focus or lens, I forget what we even called it, in each class, but there was a lot of feedback that wasn't positive about it because it's simply, it's a nod. Yay, diversity
Yeah.
in every class.
Right.
And it became redundant because everyone was
Yes.
just, it's adding a disclaimer. This might have a trigger warning, like everything in our profession. So it gets wearying for everyone to hear the same thing over and over. Of course, you need to use diversity lens and we discuss this. So it's hard to stay genuine in some of the topics that we teach and work with communities on because we're being so careful and having to edit.
Yeah.
So Gary, you're too quiet. It's making me nervous. So please say something.
Yeah. Well, whenever we talk about diversity, racism, genderism, I always think of the history, how we have a long legacy of authors like James Baldwin, who really gave me language to his experience. And he talked about how he wrote a letter to his nephew and talked about society you live in don't care for you. But it's very important that you don't allow that hatred they have for you to come on the inside of you. And then I think of authors of today like Dr. Anderson, White Rage. Because many times we like to sanitize the experiences. Like we just 100 years of Tulsa. And they're just now looking at funding. But a couple months ago, they funded other agencies, organizations. But when it comes to people of color and blacks specifically, they want to wait till people die to look at how can we resolve that issue. And so history as well as authors who have different perspectives kind of give me language and insight, because I know that my life may not be where I want to be, but I have to continue forward because generations after me. And that's what kept individuals like Fan Lou Hamer, who was tired of being sick and tired, who kept fighting and kept going. And so having my students understand lived experience rather than me focus on myself, I like to focus on history. I like to focus on the lived experiences of others who came before us, and some present, and diverse adults. Some who may feel we have legislators in 2021 who say that there's no thing as racism. And so we had a conversation in the classroom. And so we have legislators of all different ethnic groups who say the various, who's on both sides of the fence. And so I want to have a conversation with my students where you have passion, but also have literature and lived experience. Because I work at a historical Black college university, and there's a different expectation when we graduate. And so I have to prepare my students for reality, and that not to take upon the burden of teaching others about stuff that's in books. I'm in that process, but it's a journey. One of my favorite authors, Dr. Howard Thurman, he says that he always prays that his prayer is to disturb the comfort.
Yes.
And comfort the disturbed.
I'm nodding.
Howard Thurman. Yes.
That's a good one.
Yes. And so I tell my students, that's our job.
I think also even in the hiring of faculty, you can me think of when we're going through those initial cover letters. I used to do admissions too, but it was similar when we're recruiting for professors and who's going to be teaching. I think we need to have, and I'm sure it exists, I don't know who does it, but a blind, absolutely blind when it's gender, race, ethnicity, all of that should be completely blanked out because there's implicit bias and we all know it, we teach it, but we continue to do it in our initial screening process, which means we're screening out most of those who are highly qualified to teach that would make for a better reflection of our students and community. So I really challenge our CSW accredited schools to start doing that in the hiring process. And if we're actually doing, by merit and research lines, that we need to strip out the other things.
Well, one of the things about wealth is more than just money. It's access to resources like research possibilities. Who's going to mentor somebody to be able to become a research assistant to get a publication to then get into a school? Who are you comfortable with? And so the cycle continues in ways that, within academia, people say, well, we'd love to hire that person, but they just doesn't have the publications. I've got somebody over here who's got 8. Well, what kind of access did they get to the 8? Why did they have the access in the first place? So those are things that we really do have to explore. And not just explore, but call out.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's our future, which is going to go on for a long time. A lot of those hires are going to be there for decades. So the choices we're making in the front end hiring are going to be impacting all of our students for decades, at least the contract positions. Adjunct is a whole other.
Natasha, with the course you've taught, what's been the response? Even if it isn't the course you've wanted it to be, it doesn't mean that it doesn't create response. Nevertheless.
The responses now, I teach, these are, as you can probably tell, these are themes that I integrate into every course I teach. Even I'm a field liaison, so in, BSW senior practicum, seminar, these are things we focus on every class. So, and by things, I mean, what we've been talking about, racism, sexism, genderism, et cetera, et cetera. The response has been overwhelmingly excited and thankful. And I'm not saying that to laud myself, because if students weren't participating, then it wouldn't be what it is. But students are express being relieved that there is a teacher who is talking about this and who's calling out her own whiteness and calling out her own racism and talking about these things up front and not overtly, and not using terms like diversity to cover up serious direct conversations about oppression, lived experience of oppression, et cetera, which I think diversity often does. It's not direct enough. It's way far, very, very vague, right? So the overwhelming response has been, I have received only positive feedback at this point. Now, I've been teaching for only 6 years, but
Hey, that's
it's
real.
something. It's
That's a real
something.
number.
Yeah. And so I'm excited to do it. And yes, because I know I can feel the embarrassment of some students, or, oh, I don't know what to say about this, or, oh, I wish we weren't talking about this. But see, I don't care. I don't care. I respect that, but I can't cater to a white student's discomfort. I just refuse to do that. I'm just really, of course, I'm not. I'm trying to say things and ask questions. And as we know in certain therapeutic styles, you can ask a question, and just because a person doesn't answer it doesn't mean they're not thinking about it in their head, doesn't mean it's not creating
Right.
change for them on the inside. They may not talk about it, but that question is still in there because, if I ask one of you a question, if I directed at Gary, a question to Gary, Christy, and Steve, you're still going to be thinking about your own response to that question, right? Even though you're not going to say it to me. But I'm trying to model a degree of honesty and putting myself on the line to show them you can put yourself on the line too. And because I am upfront about not knowing everything and that I am a lifelong learner, before I'm a teacher, that shows that you do not have to be an expert in order to do this, but you have to start somewhere. And they are called to do that. If they want to be social workers, if they want to be part of our esteemed profession, art, craft, whatever, right, discipline, then they've got to. And frankly, I don't want social workers in our profession who are not willing to do that, who are not willing to go there, because we deal with a lot of client situations where we are the gatekeeper, that we have to make value judgments. And we have got to be aware of implicit biases. We've got to be aware of systemic oppression. We've got to be aware of these things, and we got to own up to it as to how we are part of that agenda, for the good and for the bad, because we're not one or the other. Ibram Kendi talks about, you can be a racist in one moment and an anti-racist in the next. You don't earn your badge and get to wear that for the rest of your life. You have to take action.
Yeah.
And Gary, I have to also say, authors they've been incredibly important to me. James Baldwin, absolutely. Lived experiences through literature is absolutely so important. And my students have very much responded to Audre Lorde, who describes herself as, a Black lesbian, social activist, essayist, absolutely incredible stuff. And, you can take one of her essays, which based off of one of her speeches, right? And it's short enough where you can read through that in class. I print stuff out and have students take turns reading it in class, like very, old school, right? Then we talk about that. What does that mean? What are you confused by? What strikes a nerve for you? What strikes a chord? What have you not thought about before? And so using these critical pedagogical techniques to really, lead them into a higher degree of self-awareness and insight. Anyway, and I hope my research agenda going forward, I want to explore these things. I think it's important because I don't want this anti-racism. We're waving that flag now, but are we going to sustain that? Are we as a society, and the white dominant society, are we going to continue to call ourselves anti-racist in 10 years? Or is this something we're doing now because it's the fad? Like, this has to be sustainable, and I don't want to see social work jump to another issue after they feel they've spent enough time on this, right? So there's lots going on,
Natasha?
but we have to integrate. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Sorry, Christy.
No.
Okay.
I'm thinking two things, action-wise. Something for educators, for the administrators, something they can actually do right now, like in the next school year, to make it better. I'm being as generic as possible here. And then also practicing social workers in the community or one-on-one settings. Two different action items you think could help move this forward and not just be something we're talking about or finding new words for.
I love that question, Christy. Thank you. Well, first of all, I think before you do anything, you take any action steps, you really have to be honest with yourself about where you stand on this. Does that make sense? So just because you feel like you should care about anti-racism because you're a social worker and you know that you should, you need to have a check-in with yourself about where do I stand? Maybe, I do not think that all social workers are anti-racist. I do not think all white social workers think that there's a race issue. Absolutely not. Um, we have social workers who vote for politicians who, are anti people of color, anti BIPOC, anti LGBT, anti woman. We still have social workers who do that, who vote people like with those
Sure.
agendas into office. So social workers who are teaching, first they need to understand the position of power that they have and the responsibility that they have, and they need to check in with themselves to see where they stand. Next, what I would do if that educator wants to make a change, wants to be better, wants to take the next step, even if they feel like they're not in a position right now, like they're not feeling it, right? Oh, I know this is going on, but I don't feel it. I don't feel connected to it. I would suggest I would suggest first, before you can educate, before you can lead and mediate and moderate, you need to be able to have that for yourself, right? So you have to do self-education first. A book I would recommend that actually came out with another edition, which is a journal edition that allows you to write in the text with your responses, which is part of this woman's process. It is Me and White Supremacy. This is a book. It came out a couple years ago, but recently a new edition. But it has exercises, reflection exercises that you have to go through. And this author says up front, if you don't do these exercises, if you think you're beyond that, if because you are in academia you think you know about these things and decide not to go through these exercises of reflection to enhance your self-awareness in these issues, then forget about it. You're not doing the work and you're contributing to the problem. But the book, again, it's called Me and White Supremacy. It is by Layla F. Saad. So first name Layla, middle initial is F as in Frank, last name is Saad as in dog. And again, this book came out a couple years ago. She lives in Qatar. She is Muslim. And she writes beautifully about these subjects in a way that personalizes it, and you can. She asks a lot of questions, right? So it's not just knowledge and information and her own experience. The bulk of her writing is putting questions to the reader. But again, there's now a journal edition where you can write in your responses to make an interactive experience. So I think educators to take a first step is, don't do training, don't do, look at the literature on how do I be a better anti-racist educator. No, you cannot start there. You just can't do that. You have to start at a place of humility, and you have to check in with yourself. And then you need to start reading things to see how you're checking in. Where do you stand? What are your thoughts on this? So,
That's great.
and anyway, but I do recommend that book. Obviously, there are others. Definitely, I will. Dr. Tatum has no idea who I am, but I do love her text. But this book by Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum is fantastic. Lots of great references, so you can do a lot of reference mining. She has the data. I think a lot of books that are out there don't provide excellent sources, or you don't really know how to follow up on topics that they write about. But Dr. Tatum definitely does that. But I would start at, if you want to be a better anti-racist educator, you have to start with yourself and check in with yourself, and do not assume that you know everything there is to know, because self-awareness and how you are part of these systems and what your own identity is, you have to start there, because then you're not going to be able to have an honest conversation and be an honest educator without doing that, particularly white educators. So
It's a great place for us to stop. Not that one's ever done, but
yeah.
in terms of our podcast, it's probably a great place for us to be able to stop.
Sounds good.
Gary, before we give Natasha the last word, we always have our speaker give the last word. Is there any final comment or reflection you wanted to have, or should we move to Natasha?
Sure. Just want to say thank you for coming with us on today on our podcast and highlighting your journey as well as different strategies that you would recommend for individuals. Christy has the last question. She's saying, what would you do if our faculty and leadership at a university was to say that 75% of white professors but our recruiting is, okay, let me read the question again. At this time, we have 75% of our academicians identify as white. How can we ask leadership to shift in that those numbers? So 75% of our population of academia professors are white. How can we change that shift as they face that?
Yeah, I can see that question, Gary. So I think maybe what Christy's asking is the leadership at a university is 75% white, but are recruiting primarily people of color. Okay. Is there any, so the leadership is white, but they're hiring BIPOC. Okay. And I think, so how is there any support for changing the face of leadership? Well, that's going to come from who's paying the bills. So I would say if you have, let's say, board of directors maybe, or if we're talking about a university, a president, vice presidents, deans, et cetera, who are white, who are hiring faculty who are BIPOC, how do we change the actual leadership to reflect a non-white majority, right? Well, who's making the decisions? And primarily that comes from who's paying the bills, and it's students who pay the bills, and families. So if we have our students petitioning for change in leadership, if we have our board, who I would hope to be, not all or not majority white, but if they are, I mean, the way to change is that the people who are providing the funding for your university and bringing in the money, they have to advocate that they want to see Black people, brown people, people of color, people who are outside, the default, right? In leadership, they have to advocate for that. And I would say as social workers, as social work educators, we should advocate for that in the classroom. I think that would be a great exercise to do in one of in our social work classes, is to talk about that and call the university out, because, we have to advocate for that, even if it's scary for us. And even if it puts us at risk for our own jobs, we've got to do that and say, you know what, we don't have a lot of BIPOC leadership. As students, you pay the bills, so it's really up to you. That they will listen to you. They may not listen to me, but they'll listen to you. If you tell them this is what you want, or you're going to think about changing universities, they're going to have to listen. So it has to be a sustained effort, but definitely, power in numbers, and people have to speak up. Students have to speak up.
Yeah, I think it's a great place to end. I think we end up with reality, as you said, the last word you used was sustained. There are no quick fixes on this. This is something we stay with for a long, long time. We stay with it forever. It's not over. There's not one solution. There are multiple tracks for us to have to walk, paths we have to walk down. So anyway, this has been terrific. And I think we always, as said, we'd like you to get the last word. So if there's any last summary comment you'd like to make, or any reflection you'd like to leave with our audience, Natasha, we'd love you to do that before we sign off.
Well, I'm just thankful to be here. Thankful to have a platform. And I don't know, I believe in our profession. And I believe, in what we're trying to do. I believe in our values. I believe in our ethics, and I believe that we can and have to do better. There's no choice. And we have to have conversations, because as we know through social constructionism, we can change reality through our own behaviors. It just takes conversation like this to really plant, it's cliche, but plant those seeds of change. So have conversations, question yourself. Ask who you are, especially my white viewers out there. Ask yourself about about what your identity is. And if you're a social worker, you know, or a social work student, how that affects how are you participating in systems of oppression. And in any case, if you would like to continue, or if you have any comments or questions for me, I'm sure maybe my email address will be in comments
Great.
or something like that. I would love to have a conversation. So, yeah. So
Great.
thanks to you all so
I
much.
appreciate